I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine years ago. I remember telling her, I want to do something. I want to do something in helping survivors of sexual abuse on their healing journeys. When I was saying those words, I had no idea what I was even saying, what I could possibly be doing. Like, what could I already do? But I wanted to do something in helping survivors of sexual abuse not have to feel alone. It wasn't the why did this happen, or Hashem, how did he make this happen, or what was done to deserve. It wasn't anything like that, but there was something that I just could not wrap my head around. And I remember thinking, like, Hashem, you know what sexual abuse is. You know what this does to a person. How can it be that someone goes through something like sexual abuse and not have the right supports around them? How could it be someone goes through such immense pain and suffering? Who they could talk to, who they could turn to, who could understand and validate them the way that they need.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Meaningful People podcast. Hope you're doing well. We're going to jump right into it. There is a trigger warning on this episode. Very sensitive topics are discussed. If you are below a certain age, if you're young, or if this is something that might trigger you, I would recommend asking someone that you trust, maybe a parent, if this episode is for you. In this episode, we discuss Ray of Hope, this organization that was started by Zeldy Broyde, sexual abuse survivors. That's what it was created for. And we have another person on this episode as well. Her name is Bashi, who is herself a survivor as well. And we spoke to them about their journey, their healing, Zeldy specifically about starting this organization, which has become this support for so many survivors since 2019. And this is an extremely, extremely important topic that we wanted to take on and bring to the forefront. I commend Zeldy and Bashi for their courage coming on this podcast and speaking about something that is certainly not easy to speak about at all. So we'll get to this in just a second. But first, I want to give a big shout out to my friends at Kav Halacha. You have a halacha anywhere, anytime. You call up Kav Halacha. You can even head to their website, to be honest. It's kavhalacha.org. But if you want to call them, give them a call in the US at 732-707-6666. And it's not just the US. If you're in Eretz Yisrael, there's a call-in number. United Kingdom, there's a call-in number. Australia, there's a call-in number. A little more about them. There are hundreds of Rabbanim that are there waiting to answer the phone for you. They work in 7 time zones. They've had over 60,000 callers. Maybe you don't have a Rav. Maybe Rav isn't available. Maybe you require a special area on halacha that you need answered. Maybe you need a psak immediately. Well, pick up the phone and call Kav Halacha. It's a 24-hour halacha network. Men, women, call them. Yes, you might have a shaila. It's Friday afternoon. Something quick came up. You have a question about kashrus. You need an answer. Kav Halacha is the trusted place to call to get that answer. Hit the link in the show notes in the description of this episode, or give them a call today and get your shilas answered. Now enjoy this episode of the podcast.
You are listening to the Meaningful People podcast.
The podcast featuring our nation's most impactful, influential,
and meaningful people. Oh, I'm curious, Zeldy, we can start with you. What is Ray of Hope and how did it begin? Maybe some people aren't familiar.
First of all, I want to just say on behalf of both of us, thank you so much for giving us the voice and the platform to be able to be talking about something that is not easy to talk about, but it is so important.
Yeah.
What's so beautiful for me to be able to reflect on this journey, on how this all got started, is the truth is I had absolutely no idea or any real intention of ever opening up an organization. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine years ago. And I remember telling her, I want to do something. I want to do something in helping survivors of sexual abuse on their healing journeys. When I was saying those words, I had no idea what I was even saying, what I could possibly be doing. Like, what could I already do? But I wanted to do something in helping survivors of sexual abuse not have to feel alone on their journeys. And where did that passion come from? Where did that drive and that adrenaline, because I had that inside of me, where did that come from? And it came from knowing what it was like firsthand to walk such a lonely road on this journey. I remember this clearly, having this memory of walking down the streets one day and thinking these thoughts in my head. It wasn't the why did this happen, or Hashem, how did you make this happen, or what was done to deserve. It wasn't anything like that, but there was something that I just could not wrap my head around. And I remember thinking like, Hashem, you know what sexual abuse is. You know what this does to a person. How can it be that someone goes through something like sexual abuse and not have the right supports around them? How could it be someone goes through such immense pain and suffering? Who they could talk to, who they could turn to, who could understand and validate them the way that they need? That to me, I could not wrap my head around. And little did I know at that time, Hashem was already answering me and said, Zelda, you know what, you're right. There will be one day an organization that is going to be created that is going to be specifically dedicated to the healing and support for survivors of sexual abuse. So I had no idea that 5 years ago we'd be starting an organization, but grouping 10 women together in a private home in Flatbush. And what happened in such a beautiful way, where you saw how people came from all different walks of life, coming from totally different backgrounds, and it made no difference. You're having survivors come together to talk about something that happened to them and these experiences where they could never talk about elsewhere. These are individuals that, for some of them, literally never told anyone else that they had gone through sexual abuse. And to be able to leave the shame at the door and the stigma that's attached to a trauma like this, and to finally be able to talk about things that they could literally never talk about elsewhere to no one else. And literally the light that was stuck inside of them can finally emerge and can finally unload inside of them was so powerful. How one group turned into 2, turned into 3, and turned into 20 today. The one word, if I had to think of one word that survivors, so many people who have shared with me have gone through sexual abuse, what they'll say that they're feeling, the one word that comes to me is the word loneliness. The loneliness and the isolation that survivors have to carry and go through, and not knowing where they could put that, how debilitating that could be for their journey is just unbelievable.
Wow. I want to take a moment to sort of frame the issue that we're addressing here. And in doing that, I want to thank you both for the courage and the bravery to come on this platform and talk openly about this topic, which is not an easy topic to talk about, but so important to address. And I think it might be very surprising and shocking to people just how prevalent of an issue this is. And it makes sense because the result of it is such a loneliness and such an isolation, and so much of it goes underreported and just not spoken about and not shared sometimes with anyone. How prevalent is this issue, just so that we can frame the topic that we're talking about before delving into it? Like, how prevalent is this, if you know?
So when I was younger, I remember feeling like I don't know if there's another person that had gone through something like sexual abuse. I literally didn't know anyone else who had gone through it. And that honestly was a very isolating feeling also, just feeling like this is just me. I'm the only person who went through something like this, and I don't even know like what to do with this. It's very prevalent. I mean, I meet a lot of people, whether it's donors in the fundraising world or just people who learn about the organization. And sometimes I'll get the reaction like, oh my goodness, like this is in our community, this is happening. And unfortunately, it is extremely prevalent in all over.
The statistic that I saw online is 1 in 4. Is that something that you think is?
So if I could jump in, when I joined Ray of Hope, I did an intake with a therapist, and we were talking, and she told me that 90% of her clientele, so these are Frum women and Frum girls that she sees, 90% are survivors of sexual abuse, and that's where all the traumas and all the symptoms and all the challenges that they have stem from that root cause. When I heard that as a Frum woman, again, I totally back what Zeldy was saying, that constant feeling of loneliness. So that dissipated a little bit when I heard, hey, I'm not the only one out there. And again, I also thought, I was convinced, like, I'm the only Frum woman who's ever been through this abuse. Nobody talks about it. Nobody opens up. And so when I heard that, it gave me so much hope that even though I don't know those women and girls firsthand, I'm not alone. And that was like the strongest message that I could have heard at the beginning of this journey of healing.
Bashi, if you could tell us, I guess, a little bit, what you're comfortable saying about your experience.
So I actually did not remember any of the abuse. It was done to me when I was a very, very small child. I was 3 or 4 years old. So I even look at my 3-year-old and I can't imagine, a child who has gone through this. My brain and my body, and this happens to a lot of survivors, it protects itself by totally erasing the memory. So that was kind of like a coping mechanism to be a 3 or 4-year-old and to be able to wake up and go about my daily life. The memory was completely erased until 32 years later. I started experiencing PTSD, but even though I've had a lot of mental health challenges through the years, I'd never actually experienced PTSD so strongly. I was having panic attacks. Every time I'd go to the closet to get my kids' clothes or to get dressed, I couldn't catch my breath. And I remember, like, I've held the hands of women who are going through a panic attack and, guided them through it. And then when it happened to me, I couldn't even figure out what was happening. I started having flashbacks, and they were like very small, I don't know, just like little memories here and there. And I wasn't able to function much. I was teaching full time. I had to do only 2 hours instead of 4. And because of my past experiences with mania and psychosis and all that, I started slowly slipping into mania, hypomania. And thank God, like, the doctor that was treating me and the medication that I was taking, they were able to add on top of that medication once a day for immediate release. And thank God I wasn't hospitalized, because that would have been the 3rd time. And slowly this memory, as it came back, thank God I have an amazing therapist, and I've been processing it since.
Well, that must have been you must have been blindsided in a way, but by all that 32 years later.
Yeah.
And at that point, is that when you reached out to Ray of Hope?
Not yet. So I started prepping for EMDR. You create a trauma egg, and then she did small T traumas with me. As I was going through that trauma work, I felt a loneliness like I had felt many years before, until I became open about having gone through depression and all those mental illness that I've been through my whole life. And when that loneliness, because I shared and met so many people who had gone through it, I didn't feel lonely anymore. And now all of a sudden, fast forward 3 years, and I feel loneliness once again. And so with that, I was desperately trying to find an organization that could support me. I've been in the 12 steps for 10 years. I've gotten a tremendous amount of support. And even with the 12 steps, I couldn't find a support group that had Frum women or girls. And that's where the loneliness kept coming up over and over again. I heard about a hotline, and I would call it. It's called Za'aka, and it's for survivors of sexual abuse. I was able to call it on Shabbos if I was experiencing extreme loneliness. The Rav said for sure. But then I heard about Ray of Hope. I can't even remember who mentioned it. And then it just started from there. And just, again, hearing 90% of women and girls have been through this, that itself was just like, I'm not alone. And that's when I joined Ray of Hope. I couldn't believe how much they're doing and how much they're helping women and young girls. So I honestly, I feel so lucky to be a part of Ray of Hope.
It's amazing. It's the loneliness is a big part of it, which I'm hearing. And for this part of the podcast, one thing I would love to get out there for the listeners is that whether someone's going through this now, or they have gone through this in the past and they haven't gotten help for it, you're not alone. there's unfortunately a lot of people who've gone through this and who are going through this. I was speaking to somebody who told me, we were talking about statistics of boys specifically, who go off the derech. What percentage does he think, if you take 4,000 kids, how many of those kids were abused? And he said, it was staggering. He said, a vast majority of the boys who are not from, they were sexually abused. They are in pain. They are in pain. So the not alone piece, that's something I want everyone to hear loud and clear. Zeldy, if you could speak to anything else besides for the loneliness aspect, just to bring our listeners, our viewers, into the mind of someone who has gone through this tkufa, this, I guess, most challenging part of life.
Yeah, what's coming to my mind is that there was a chapter in my life that I felt that the pain of what I had gone through just outweighed the good. And it was so painful to just literally exist and to be and to go through working through it, to see like, how in the world am I ever going to get to the other side? And I have this image in my head of a certain time period where I literally was so lost and I felt just so alone and just not knowing that I'm ever going to make it out and just be like everyone else. And even when I was with my friends and going through the motions and doing what everyone else was doing, just felt so different. It just felt like I'm not like everyone else. And, but having to be able to reflect back on seeing over those years and doing the work and going to therapy and really peeling those layers and seeing how, as painful as it was, to have to go back there and have to relive and have to go through and do that work, there is so much hope and there's so much healing. And, to anyone who's listening that is struggling immensely and just not knowing how they're ever going to see the light, that, my message to them would be that it's not easy. I'm not going to sugarcoat. There is so much hope and there's so much healing.
It's so interesting because, Zeldy, what you're sharing, it could literally be me saying my story. Like it's I guess, like the saga of anybody who's been through that type of experience. Like, as you're saying, the thoughts, like, I'm so different than, even though I seem like I had a lot of friends, because I have a twin sister who's very sociable and very funny. So I really grew up in her shadow, which I thank God every day that I made friends that way. But I constantly felt different then. I don't belong. What's wrong with me? Why can't I be like other girls? Like that constant replay of those thoughts throughout my teenage years and even into motherhood, and was constantly like that tape playing in my head. And I always wondered, like, what is off? Like, what's wrong with me? Like, why did I turn out this way? And other girls just seem okay. They socialize, they hang out, I don't know. I felt like, why am I so complicated? Why did God create me this way?
Did either of you at any point think that you wouldn't be a survivor of this, that you would never get to the other side of this challenge?
Yeah, I could relate to that too. Like, where I thought it would never end, like as a teenager for sure. Like, I was in constant clinical depression. I was experiencing anxiety, social anxiety. I became anorexic when I was about 15. So all these like exacerbating problems I felt like would never go away. And I was also convinced that I would never get married. Who would ever want to marry me? I would never have kids. Like, kind of like I just wrote off a future. And I was constantly stuck in what I was experiencing. But now in hindsight, I was stuck in an experience that I couldn't move past. And interestingly enough, like me through the years of therapy, I learned that trauma, because I thought trauma is the incident that happens, is trauma, causes trauma. Trauma is unprocessed emotions. Mm-hmm. So there are some kids that I've heard, that say have gone to sleepover camp and were molested or their bodies were violated and they called their parents right away. I've heard, firsthand from a young boy, and it was taken care of. The counselor, was fired, and this boy is comfortable speaking about it because it's not a trauma. It's something that was processed.
It's processed healthily right away.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting.
I 100% there were times where I felt like I was not going to make it to be that survivor. I was so stuck in the trauma. I was so stuck in that pain of feeling so unworthy, so just feeling just so empty. Feeling was really just such emptiness. And I had no idea how to fill that up for myself. When someone goes through childhood sexual abuse, it's like the foundation of who they are is so shattered and so broken. And you have to literally learn how to like be reborn and to relive. And when you're going through that and when you're going through so much pain, like how do you even see past that you'll ever be able to get to the other side? So definitely moments in the past where I really questioned, am I going to make it out?
Well, you did, and so did you. You were on the phone with your daughter before. So both of you, Baruch Hashem, you've built families and you've built an organization. It's incredible, what you're doing. I want to ask you, you brought up the camp piece, and I think it's important. Summer's coming up. And are there signs that a parent can see with their son or daughter? If you know more the female aspect, are there signs a parent can see like, okay, this is not right, and they should inquire? What should a parent do if they suspect that maybe something happened to their child? What would you say? And maybe not from a clinical perspective, or maybe from a personal experience perspective.
So a lot of times a child shuts down completely. So either if they were a very bubbly personality, all of a sudden they become quiet. They can also develop fears. So I think that there's not like one cookie cutter symptom that parents may see, but I think like if the child is a little bit different, is a little bit off, and it's not always because of, sexual abuse, but I believe, as an educator and also as a parent, it is our role to open up these types of discussions with our kids. Like obviously not scare them and say, but I really believe this, that when we use words, and it's kind of like, a passion of mine, which is psychoeducation, where, to bring up the word molestation or to say the word sexual abuse, maybe not abuse, but when we say these words, it creates a safe space for kids, whether it's, especially as a parent. And so if a child goes through something, they know that they can come to their parents because it's not a topic that they're going to be told it's not appropriate. How dare you have like they're not going to be told off because the parents already opened that space. They provided their child with a supportive conversation where they can always come back to it. Mm-hmm. And when the child brings it up, it's not them bringing it up. The parents have already said, this is an okay topic. And if you come to me, we'll discuss it. I'll get you through it. And I think that that's a very, very important, that's an important role that we have as parents.
Yeah, to really bring down that barrier, right? It's going to be very hard for the children to broach the subject if it's taboo. And if it's not something that there's space to talk about within the context of a parent-child relationship, then we can't expect our children to be the first ones to go
100%,
there.
100%. I'll just echo what you just said. I can just share a memory for myself. When I was younger, I didn't have the words, or I didn't even know how to understand what I had gone through, to be able to process that as a young child, and to, for sure, not to articulate what I was going through. So it came out in other ways. But I didn't have the words. I think, first of all, if a parent ever has a concern or is worried about something that they're seeing in their child, I'm not a clinician, so I would always say to speak to a mental health professional if you have the reason to be concerned. Not always does it have to point to that, but for sure to speak to a professional if there is a reason to be concerned. But I will say, as parents, like you said, to create a safe environment for your children that they could come and to talk to you and to disclose if need be, to have that safety and unconditional love in a home is so crucial and so important.
Sure. We'll be right back to this episode of the podcast, but first a quick word from my friends at injurylawyer.com. Yes, you guessed it. That is the Rothenberg law firm. Head to their website right now. You know what? Billions of dollars have been won in cases by Rothenberg, and they've been doing this for 50 plus years. So if you were injured, perhaps there was a car accident, maybe you fell, there's medical malpractice, there's negligence, maybe something happened in a nursing home, you might be able to get compensated for such an experience. And you will know when you speak to Rothenberg Law Firm. You can call today at 866-771-4988 or head to their website and click on the homepage. There is a button to do a free case evaluation. I know people who have done it. I know people who have gotten their cases covered by Rothenberg Law Firm. So make sure you reach out to them today. Now back to this episode.
Before going further, I think, into the work that Ray of Hope does and the hope that it gives to survivors, if I may just pull you back for a minute, back to the origin story, where you shared that you sort of looked up to the Eibishter and you said, Hashem, how could there not be something like this? And I'm curious what sort of you noticed that Hashem answered the tefillah, that there was going to be something. At what point did you realize that it was going to be by you building it?
I had absolutely, like I said, I had no intention of actually even starting an organization at all. The word organization was never something that, like, I often wondered how other people start organizations. I imagine a lot of it comes from this just burning passion, or if there's a void or something. But I remember, like, someone one time told me there's no support network. There's nowhere for survivors to come together and get the support that they need. And I'm like, you're right. So I know a couple of women that I personally knew, and I was, call it a mentor, it's just a friend. I was a friend to a few women that were going through their journeys and had nowhere to turn to. You can go to therapy once a week. What are you doing the 6 days? What are you doing? Who are you turning to? Who can you call at the end of your day and say, I'm having a horrible day and I know what you're going through. I know exactly. We went through different experiences, but I know what you're going through because we have that shared bond of having gone through something like this. And putting them together in a room, these couple of women, and completely had no idea what I was doing, to be honest.
It was just like you and that.
That's the common denominator, by the way, to everyone that comes in here and starts an organization.
Sure.
They all say the same thing. I had no idea what I was doing.
I have no idea. I'm not a mental health professional, and I'm very clear about that, but grouping these women together in that home and seeing what that was doing and seeing that, oh my goodness, this is missing in the world.
Yeah.
That we don't have a safe space for survivors. And I want to just share this with you because this is what I've heard from so many of the survivors. And it's going to sound interesting to say this, but so many survivors have shared that, like, if I had to go through a pain, I'm not even gonna, question why I had to go through this. We really don't know in this world why we have to go through certain suffering. So we're not even gonna question that. But if, like, Hashem, if you had to give me a pain, couldn't you at least give me something else? I'm not gonna like a specific pain, but couldn't you at least give me something else?
Yeah.
That I could pick up the phone, I could call an organization, I could call a friend, I could call a family member, whatever it is, that I don't have to be suffering so silently in this bubble of isolation that we'll go through.
Yeah.
I need that. And that's what Ray of Hope's goal and mission is, to create a support network for survivors that they can know that we as a community are there to support them.
The first time I ever spoke to God was in the psych ward, my first hospitalization. And I found that when I was in the depths of despair, like in the 12 steps, they call it rock bottom, in those moments when I really realized, like, I cannot free myself. I can't get myself out of this situation. The more I try, the worse it gets. That's when I would reach out to Hashem and say, you got to help me. So when I was actually released from the hospital, this was 11 years ago, I felt alone. Ever since I started learning Shar B'tachon from Choves Halavavos, one of the most powerful messages that I received as we were learning was a young girl who said, when we say, why did this happen to me? We're in self-pity. So it's all about, why would you do this to me, God? Why me? But then she said, if you switch one word and you say, what? What do you want from me, God? What do you want me to do with this experience? And that really shaped my whole journey of healing, where it's like I cannot control what happened to me. I can't go back. If I would rewind, I would take away a lot of things that I went through. But I truly believe that Hashem wants the other women and girls out there who have been through this to know they're not alone, and that there's hope and there's support from Ray of Hope. There's so much validation. There's so much understanding and hope. And I'm sure that's why the organization is Ray of Hope. I honestly experienced that ray of hope when I reached out and joined the organization.
I want to just share that we do these annual events for the organization once a year. where last year we had 70 women come together at American Dream. I just want to give a public thank you to the Gramasian family for donating the water park completely to Ray of Hope for free. For Ray of Hope. It's just beautiful to see how there's such good people out there who he told me. He's like, Zeldy, this is for you. This is for you, and go use it. There was a woman that came over to me, and she's like, Zeldy, you don't even understand what this is doing for me. I'm seeing 70 beautiful women that are coming together. I felt so alone in my journey. I felt so different. I felt so scarred. And seeing that I'm not in this by myself. There are other people who are going through this, and we're all in this together. It made such a difference to her in her journey.
What would you say? I guess, I mean, to the stigma, it seems like in many other things, Baruch Hashem, the stigma is being broken down when it comes to mental health, when it comes to other illnesses. It might be accurate to say that sexual abuse might be the big one that's still standing in some form. Would you agree with that? And then what do you think is the path to breaking down that stigma?
That's a great question. So, first of all, the fact that we could be sitting here on this podcast and to be talking about a topic like this, I mean, thank you for bringing us here to talk about something that is so important. It's really not easy to talk about. Really not easy to talk about. It's not easy to hear either. But we're here and we're doing it. And I think as a Jewish community, we have taken tremendous strides and to be able to bring mental health all together to the forefront and talk about these topics that are extremely prevalent and are so important to talk about. So that's amazing. But we still have work to do. And there is a lot of education and awareness that needs to happen. I think having more discussions and conversations with the Rabbanim, with Kala teachers, with Chassan teachers, with doctors on how to be more sensitive and to be just more mindful when you're dealing with survivors of sexual abuse and what they need and how we could be, more helpful to their journeys.
Yeah, 100%. Fear of stigma. So it's interesting. Fear is the exact opposite of faith. Because, my husband says this, fear is what if. Faith is even if. So what if I share openly about being a survivor? What if my kids never get Shidduchim? What if I'm banned from the community? But even if I've been through an experience like this, that everything is godly. So for some reason, Hashem put me through this. Even if Hashem is always going to be with me. And it's like a complete shift in that fear. Before I shared, unfortunately, I lost both my parents a year apart. Before my mother passed away, it was a very quick illness. I felt like you were saying, Zeldy, like I felt like this like little spark of light that had to come out finally. Like I was done hiding. And I asked my mother permission. I said, Ma, can I share my story? And she said, go ahead. And then she passed on. And then I asked my father, I said, they're featuring an article about my story. So he said, you're not going to put your name? And I said, of course I'm going to put my name. That's the whole idea of breaking the stigma. I actually think that people are very afraid of ruining Shidduchim. I think that we're already ruining Shidduchim without speaking openly about these topics. And I'll explain, like resumes, people speak about the Shidduch crisis. I believe that the crisis of Shidduchim is because resumes are perfect. If someone's marrying someone else and everything on the paper and everything on the date is perfect, then we're not setting up these young couples for success because, there's all those skeletons in the closet that eventually are going to come out, whether it's a few months later, whether it's years later. And obviously, like with Shidduchim, a Rav, from what I've heard, would say if this is something of the past that won't affect the couple, then you don't need to say it. So I'm not saying to like openly air out all the dirty laundry and say this is what you're getting. But also at the end of the day, if we don't talk about these important topics, like you're saying, Kala teachers, Rabbanim, then if there is a young girl or a young guy, or even an older girl or guy who is experiencing what I experienced, PTSD or anything in that form, they have a go-to. They know that there's safe people, there's knowledgeable people, there are Rabbanim that can help them.
Wow. There's so much in what you just said that resonated with me. First of all, is that your husband's formulation, the what if to even
He's
it?
very smart, so
Wow.
he has.
I'm going to need to connect with him afterwards.
Yeah.
He sounds awesome.
Let's call him right now.
Get him on the line. If we're not able to connect with each other during the shidduch process, in light of our life's experiences, and we're not busy putting up this facade of this image that we want to project to the world, then how could we expect success long-term in relationships?
Of course.
Because people have experiences. People have, we're talking about how prevalent this particular abuse is. And if that person is going to have hope to get married, that needs to be a reality. So maybe it won't appear on the resume, but if we're afraid to even talk about that, if we're afraid to go there, if we're afraid to acknowledge that this happens, and if you're going to have a relationship with this person, that has to be part of your journey, then we're setting our generations up for failure.
And, going back to the symptoms that parents can recognize, I don't know how much I could share, but a lot of times to reclaim the body, girls or boys will start getting tattoos because that's their way of like gaining control over what happened to them. Piercings. In my case, it was eating disorders because anorexia was a way of regaining control over my body. So whether it's a girl or a boy who's starving themselves, or the flip side is becoming overweight because if I'm skinny, then I'm attractive. And so I know a lot of, people who go to the opposite extreme, where if I stay overweight, then nobody will ever be attracted to me. And a lot of girls, I know you said the ones who go off the derech, I love, and I think I learned this from Avi Fishoff, it's on their derech. Mm-hmm. Because if a girl is told that dressing tznius is to protect her and that she won't be attractive, then if she experiences sexual abuse, then she doesn't want to dress modest anymore because it didn't protect her. Also, like sexual abuse is not necessarily targeted at the person that it's happening to. It's someone who's very sick, who has not gotten the help they need. Most of the time, it's someone who they themselves experience sexual abuse. And because they're not able to process and deal with it, they just perpetuate. Yeah.
We'll be right back to this episode in just a second. But first, a word from my friends at Town Appliance. Yes, the best appliance store in the entire world. And they've been the best since 1979. Yes, it was also known as many years before I was born. But as soon as I was born, I just kept hearing the people around me talk about Town Appliance. So the second I started my own podcast, I felt totally moved and said, I need to speak about them. A no-fuss shopping experience. The best customer service you can get. That is at Town Appliance. Whether you're doing a brand new kitchen, you need new construction, and you need your appliances, the one place you're going to go to is Town Appliance. And not only can you call them up or send them an email or maybe snail mail, as they say, you can message them on WhatsApp. Yes, born in 1979, but in the 21st century. That is Town Appliance for you. The best appliance store in the entire world. You only have one choice. July 4th is coming up. You want to have a nice barbecue. Maybe get some stuff for that. Get that grill, get that fridge, maybe an outdoor fridge. I heard that's like a thing nowadays. Is it? Maybe you'll tell me. Anyways, hit thetownappliance.com or send them a message on WhatsApp today and tell them that you heard about them on Meaningful People Podcast. Enjoy the rest of this episode.
I want to mention Atara Lasky, who was a guest that came on the podcast to talk about anorexia specifically. And it came up as I was hearing you talk about someone's willingness to acknowledge that there is an issue and not pretend that everything is awesome. And specifically parents that are aware of that and that don't avoid these realities in the shidduch process. I know her in-laws. I know them well. They're amazing people. And they did such an incredible shidduch by having their son date and ultimately marry Atara. I think they had a baby not long ago. And they're just such incredibly strong, amazing, resilient people with emunah that is so inspiring. And like, these are the people that you would want your children to do shidduchim with. People that have real life happening and they don't run away from it. They face it and they have an incredible resilience and happiness in their life as a result of it.
100%. When I was dating, I was very nervous. What should I do? Should I say something? Should I not? I mean, this is such a big part of me and my story. And I was going through therapy and I was doing all the work and I wanted to share that. And I remember my therapist really helped and coached me on what to say and how to say it and really helped me. And I did. And I knew that I was going to be taking that chance. Like, he might not accept me. And I was preparing myself for that rejection, feeling that you don't want me because of what I went through. And the response that I got was so beautiful. And he's my husband. And he told me, he's like, this is something that happened to you. This is not you. This is something that happened to you. What's and it was, I like, calm down. I'm like, oh, wow. Like, he saw me as a person, not that the trauma that I went through. So many of us who had gone through significant traumas and challenges, the sexual abuse becomes their entire life. I don't even know who I am underneath it. Right. So this is where the work comes in, where we have to do that work and find who we are underneath the layers and layers that were created from the traumas that we went through.
Yeah. So I think it goes to the point that you were making before, Nachi, that there are other conditions that people have support around where it's easier to not make it part of one's identity.
Right.
And there's that separation between whether it's a disease or a condition or some type of experience, and it's not as associated with one's identity.
Yeah.
In this particular realm, it's so much work to separate those two out.
Yeah.
There's something about sexual abuse that just attacks the essence of a person.
Yeah.
Especially as a childhood. I mean, it seems like it robs one of their innocence, of their childhood.
It's also, there's so much shame that I've experienced, and that women and girls and boys, there's also, I want to speak up also for the male population out there, that there's so much shame. Like, I'm actually onto my second book, which is called Survivor to Thriver, and I'm just bringing it up because, there's all these actresses and that stand up and say, I'm a survivor of sexual abuse. But I feel like as a Yid, it's not enough to just be a survivor, because then I'm putting so much emphasis and so much power on what happened. And instead, I can be a thriver, So I've heard this again in therapy. Guilt is I made a mistake. Shame is I am a mistake. And for me, like the second book is actually, the chapters are every, like a negative thought. They call it stinking thinking in the 12 steps. So let's say one chapter will be, I am a mistake. Another chapter will
erroneous.
Be, I am.
All followed by an erroneous.
Yeah, of course, right? Of course. Survivor to Thriver. So I am a mistake, and then another one is, I'm damaged.
Erroneous.
So if this happened to me, that means that there's something wrong with me. Right. There's something, like you said, like internally, my essence is damaged. There's something that, why was I chosen? This shame that people walk around with. For me, it's also embarrassment. Why would I ever tell people that I went through this?
I totally hear that. Zeldy, you dedicated your life to helping survivors. Not secretively.
Thrivers.
Push me with your finger. You've dedicated your life to helping people with this, and I'm sure hearing these stories on a regular basis takes a toll on you. My question is, how you deal with that? Especially when it was or is such a source of trauma in your life, what you went through. One would think you want to separate yourself as much as possible from anything relating that, but you are in this field and this is what you decided to do. How do you manage that? How do you balance that?
Such a good question.
I should start a podcast now.
How long do we have here? It's a great question. It takes a toll. I would be lying to you if I told you that it doesn't take a toll on me at some times. There are points in this work that it gets hard and it gets challenging, and I could even get triggering at times. But I will say is that it's transformed my life for the better. Taking something that was so painful and it caused so much hurt and so much suffering, and to transform that and to do something good and to do something positive. I was once talking to a donor, and I'm talking to him a little bit about how the organization got started and what we're doing today and how we're evolving. And he turns to me and he says, Zeldy, what you went through, it's a gift. And I'm looking at him like, I could think of a better gift, to give me. And he's like, Zeldy, you don't understand what you went through. Look what you're doing with it today. look what you have an opportunity to take something that was so broken and so damaged and so hurt. And look what can emerge. That's the gift. And like, I never forgot that. I never forgot that from him. So the toll, it's 100% can be very challenging and difficult at times, but I am so grateful to have such a wonderful support network around me that's supporting me and pushing me to continue to do this. I mean, I talk about my family, my friends, and every single supporter out there. You know, when I do a lot of the fundraising, so when I'm going to these donors, and a lot of them are not necessarily affiliated with the organization directly or really even know anyone necessarily who had gone through this, but they're so receptive and so willing to hear and so willing to give and so willing to be a part of. To me, that's the biggest chizuk that it can give me. It's the biggest boost, saying that I have so many people standing behind us, you know, and I just want to just highlight to the amazing board that we have today that's standing right behind this organization that is so dedicated to helping us, you know, continue on our mission. Last week, I think it was last week, I got a call literally out of the blue. There was this woman who called me and she's like, Zeldy, I just want to tell you, thank you so much for what you're doing for Klal Yisrael. You have no idea what you're even doing, the impact you're having on people's lives. And she didn't know this. She didn't know how much I needed to hear that day. Because I had a hard day that day. And those words that she was telling me, I got off the phone. I'm like, what just happened? It was like Hashem sent me this person to call me just to give me the chizuk that I needed. And these are the kind of moments that I have seen such bracha coming out of this organization that really, if like you look at the path, and this is why I love reflecting back on the growth and how it all got started, where it is today, where we hope it to be, because honestly, nothing really, it makes no sense if you put it down on paper how it all evolved, and just seeing how, you know, where the organization is going to today and how many people are invested and involved. And that's what helps with the toll that we talk about. You know, having the support system around me is so beautiful.
Yeah, and it's all about transforming darkness into light. Because all of us have been through dark times, whether it's, you know, maybe not as extreme as sexual abuse, but we all go through moments. And it's what we do with it. You know that saying, like, God doesn't give you what you can't handle? I always hated it.
Oh my God.
Because it's like, God, I can't handle this.
Hated that line.
But then in honor of my parents, I started a shir every second Shabbos after my parents passed away. And it was unbelievable. It was a book called Transforming Darkness into Light. What the author was bringing up was that we are a neshama. My body and all those things house the neshama. So all of a sudden that slogan took on a different meaning. The reason why I could get through it is because God is inside me. So it's not me alone. And that also goes back to that loneliness. Like when I was in the depths of despair and I was like so lonely and so broken, that's when, you know, I reached out and said, Hashem, you have to help me. I found an unbelievable class by Y.Y. Jacobson. And I've never seen this before. I've been listening to it the whole time that I'm here in New York. He talks about Esther was the first sexual abuse victim who became open. And I'm thinking, wow, I've never heard that before. You know, Rabbi Jacobson was sharing that all the experiences that she went through in the palace, and she was abducted and she was, you know, subjected to a king who was not so moral and not so predictable. It was all about feeling hidden and feeling like Hashem wasn't there. Hashem's name is not even in the Megillah. She felt like what she had to do when she went in front of the king and she was choosing to go to sacrifice her life. It was like Hashem wasn't there. And it was all about discovering Hashem in those moments. And I think it's so beautiful when we're able to hear about, you know, someone who lived years ago, obviously, that we look up to. And it's so relatable. Like she went through the same process. She was terrified. She expressed that. And she went out of her comfort zone to save probably thousands of women. And I credit her to this day because without that video and that class, I probably would not have had the strength to come today. So when I was healing, I thought, okay, Hashem, you wanted that to happen under your watch. Hashem was not okay with what was happening. And many times, if it's done by a religious person, that's very confusing. So it might open up a whole different, but just like Hashem, he's with us and he's not okay with the abuse that happens to any of us.
We shouldn't think that just because we say everything happens for a reason that Hashem condoned that behavior. That behavior is not condoned.
Yeah.
It's not acceptable. It's very deep.
It's
very deep.
The biggest miracle and the biggest shinui teva, the deviation from natural order, is that people do have bechira, to choose against the ratzon of Hashem. And that concealment in this world, that hiding that Hashem does in this world to make space for bechira, is the most unnatural thing. It's wildly miraculous that there's room to choose outside of the will of Hashem. And that stira, that contradiction between Yediyah and Bechira is unreconcilable in our physical minds, which is limited by this world. But Hashem, who exists outside of this world, put that into this world. And it's not our job to try to reconcile that. But moving back to something that you said that I think was also so helpful to me in accepting that Hashem doesn't give us more than we can handle, is that he also doesn't give us less than we can handle. So as long as it's only Hashem doesn't give us more than we can handle, I find that can be sometimes invalidating. But when and Hashem also doesn't give us less than we can handle, then I feel empowered to know that if this is on my plate, then this is exactly what Hashem is calling me to do for the order of the day.
There's a video I want to play from Rabbi Wallerstein. As you're talking, this came to mind. Just because, I'll play it for you and you'll hear it, and people will play it on the episode as well. I don't know why it's coming to mind, but I think it's Nagaya. So
if it's coming to mind, it's for a reason.
And I said to the class, I want to know, where is Hashem? So I want everybody to write on a piece of paper, where is Hashem? Because I didn't want them to copy each other. There are 22 in the class, 21 of them wrote, in heaven, up there. The 22nd girl was this kid. She didn't write up there. She wrote, in there. Well, what does that mean? I didn't know what that meant. In there, not up there, in there. Okay? So I looked over to her desk. I remember sitting in the corner. You wrote on your paper, in there. What does that mean? I said, Miriam, where is Hashem? Little kid, where is Hashem? She goes, in there. She's in here. I'm like, how do you know? She said, because I feel him. In all my years of chinuch, no one has ever answered, I feel him in here. If I would have come in here and asked you, you would have, everybody points up. Why? Because she's alone in the dark. And there's no one out there for her. And when there's no one out there for you, and you think you're in the dark, this little first grader understood that Hashem is in here. Not up there, not over there, but Hashem is in here.
Oh, that is so beautiful.
Yeah.
First of all, I just want to mention that in the darkest of times for me, when I was really in the throes of the trauma and really not knowing how I'm going to ever get out. And there was a lot of times where I was very angry at Hashem. Just how could he do this to me? Where are you? And just really feeling like I was just left completely alone. But I somehow turned to him. And when I was crying and I was feeling I had nothing, I somehow turned to him. And I have felt his presence every single step of the way throughout the years and in my life today. And I just want to highlight Rabbi Wallerstein was our first rabbi before we brought on therapists to run the groups. Rabbi Wallerstein was the very first rabbi to speak to the women in the support groups that we had. Oh, he's been a big supporter of ours.
Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Bracha.
I actually discovered Hashem in the psych ward because I got mad at him. I literally thought that if I'm going to curse God or I'm going to scream at him, a fire is going to come out of heaven and consume me. And I'm Chava with the Eitz Hadas, I don't know.
You were right, God, by the way. The fire of Emunah consumed you.
Of course. And it was nothing happened. And then all of a sudden I was now we're talking. That's really where my relationship with Hashem started. But going back to some symptoms that we might see in children, I had a student who, first of all, wasn't eating, wasn't coming with food to school. If a girl would come close to her, she would shut down. she was like literally like a shell. And when I see that, that's an alarm signal. Also, if a girl would come over and hug her, she would brush it off. So that, that was definitely signs of abuse. And Baruch Hashem, a Rev got involved and was able to help out. If a girl or a boy is rejecting hugs, is rejecting affection from parents or from anybody, that could also be a sign. If they don't want to be in any pictures, they don't want to be seen, that stems from, I don't want to be seen. I'm not heard. I'm not believed. So a lot of times those can point towards, but again, it's not always abuse, and obviously consult with a health professional. Also, I think it's important to mention that, stranger danger used to be if a stranger comes up to you, offers a lolly, and you go with them. It could be, and most of the time now when we speak to children, it's most of the time someone who they trust.
Right.
So it could be a counselor, it could be a principal, it could be a rabbi, it could be an aunt, an uncle, a parent, a sibling. And that happens a lot in the Frum communities. And because of that shame and secrecy, nobody would ever want to say, like, I was molested by my brother, or if a child or an adult goes through rape, they don't want to say it because chas v'shalom, we should even mention that word, but Hashem created it for a reason, and nobody should have to go through it alone.
Right. I want to ask each of you, close your eyes and picture you're sitting in front of a young girl who is struggling with similar to what you've gone through in life. And she doesn't know what to do. She hasn't yet, gone to help. She doesn't know if she has the courage to go get that help. But she's listening to this podcast. And she's pulled over maybe on the side of the road somewhere, listening to you. What would you tell her?
It's always the same 3 words, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's you're not alone. That for me would have been a game changer. Also, when I joined the 12 steps actually for sexual abuse, and I shared, usually it's thanks for sharing. When I joined a support group for survivors, the first time I shared, they answered, you are heard. And it did something in me. Like it was, I'm getting emotional even saying it. There was that part of me, a part of my life that I never thought people would believe. I never thought I would ever have a voice to say it, to be heard, to be understood, to be seen. And that's why, I'm sitting here today, because I want women and girls out there to know that they're heard. They have a voice, whether it's sitting on a podcast or just calling a hotline, calling Ray of Hope, reaching out to someone. You're heard and you're seen. And that would have been something that it would have probably shaped a much brighter experience for me.
I got a phone call from a young woman once, and she calls me up and she said, Zeldy, how long does it take? How long does it take for me to get to point A to point B? For me to do the work? If I do the work, how long is it going to take for me to get to the other side? The answer that I told her was that there's no formula. There's no exact recipe or formula. Say, if you do this modality, if you do this therapy, you are going to be perfectly healed. It is a process, and it's a journey, and it can be a very painful one, but I'm a huge believer in therapy. And if you trust the process, if you go through the motions, if you start really peeling those layers and getting down to the root cause of what it is that you went through, there's 100% so much hope and so much healing out there. And that I've witnessed it firsthand. And it's interesting because people will come over to me and say, when do I get to look like you? When do I get to be like you? And I want to tell them and say, it's a journey. We're on a journey together.
I imagine that when someone who is initially willing to go down that journey that you're describing, but is so unsure about when am I going to finally get to the other side? Tell me if I'm wrong. I speculate, but there must be this urge to snap your finger and show them their entire journey. But there's no way to do that because they have to go through that arduous process of putting in the work and being patient and being resilient to do that work and end up on the other side. And there's so little that you can do other than be there for them and support them and empower them to take their own steps through that journey, because it's their journey to go on and it's their process to live through. And being in the position that you're in, like, it must be so, like, you must be so desirous of just like telling them, just like, stick it out. Like, this will happen for you if you do it, but they have to develop that willingness and put in that work. 100%.
Exactly what you just said. Everyone's journey is so subjective to what they went through and their experiences. So there's no one way, this is the therapy you should be doing, and then you're going to be healed. It's such a process and such a journey. I could say that going through it alone, I don't know how someone goes through a journey like this alone and not having the right supports around. So whatever that may look like in their life, they should get those people around them and find those supports around their journeys. But I have seen in my own growth and so many of our members that I'm, in touch with, to see if when you are going through the work and going through the motions, and it is so brutal and it is so painful. So I'm not going to sugarcoat and say, just go through it. It'll be fine. It is so hard. But when you could do the work, just look back 6 months ago. Where were you 6 months ago? I guarantee you're going to see, oh, wow, I worked through this. And then just keep going. Don't look at the future. When is the end line? When is all the pain going to go away? Just keep day by day, moment by moment, and then take those moments to reflect back and see where you've grown. Because I was not in the place that I was last year. I was for sure not in the place where I was 5 years ago. And yeah, I still have a journey. I still have where to go. I still have where to evolve into, because we're all growing as humans. And, in
the same way today is unrecognizable compared to a year ago. Imagine what can be in a year from now.
100%. It's something that I found really helpful for me is it's okay to not be okay sometimes also.
Yeah.
And something that I really live with and live by is that I don't know someone told this to me, one of the therapists, I don't know. I pictured it like in boxes. Like, I could have my story, I could have my pain, I could have my challenges, and I could also put it in a box right now. And I could also be functional, and I could also be happy, and I could also live. I can honor the part of myself that wants to give to myself and deserves that I want to, live a fruitful, healthy, functional life.
Yeah.
And I can also have that pain also. It's not a contradiction. It's not like I have to just be focused so much on the pain that I'm going through and not also give myself what I deserve. So that I found that very helpful.
Also, I'm a big fan of EMDR. That's something that it's the only way I'm sitting here today. They call it the container. So for me, when I revisited the memory as a little girl, and then you kind of go back to the memory and then kind of give a happy ending. So who's a safe person that came in and held me? For me, without batting an eyelash, it was my mother. She came in and hugged me and said, "This will never happen again. I'm going to protect you." She also took care of the perpetrator, that he was never allowed into my life. And when I was told by the therapist, let's get a container, the container that I chose was a vase with flowers. And it was just that image of like my mother hugging me. So it's actually, I went the night that I had that container, I went to a store and I bought a vase with flowers, and it's sitting on my dining room table. And that's that, looking at it and saying, like, yes, those memories exist, and I'm not in denial, but they're like at the bottom of a vase filled with flowers.
That's a very powerful image.
It's beautiful because flowers come from dirt and mud in some pretty bad places. That's
I think this is a whole different discussion, but when people judge others, like, let's say we see a young girl walking down the street. She went to a Frum school. All of a sudden, she's in pants. All of a sudden, she has tattoos. She has 4 piercings in her ear. She's not keeping Shabbos. People only look at the outside. And I always say this, people judge because they have no idea what that person went through. If they were in their shoes, I don't know that they would even be alive or more from. Hashem is the true judge. Hashem doesn't judge us because he puts us through situations that, however we come out, he's proud of us. I've walked with girls or took them out, and I've said to them, "You are so brave You are so brave to dress the way you dress, to be the person you are. And if only people know how amazing it is that you're walking around. Like, you know, I've sat with girls and visited girls who tried to overdose. These are from girls, realizing that anybody walking around, whether it's a boy or girl, we cannot judge them, because if we actually knew what they went through and to become the person they are, we would be in admiration of who they are.
And
as we are of you both.
Yeah, and Zeldy, last word. What would you say about that society? What we can do better about the people who maybe we know who are survivors and those who we don't know? How can we be more sensitive to this whole topic?
Nachi rarely does this, by the way. Do another follow-up question after the final question.
Yeah.
Good for you, dude.
Feeling I'm really, really risky today.
You know, we say seeing is believing. I think that as a society, but especially as Frum Yidden, hearing is believing. And if women and girls or even boys would know that if they spoke openly, or they went to a parent, or they went to a teacher or a Rav, we need to be able to believe them. Because, you know, I was listening to a podcast. Kids don't make these things up, and neither do Frum women. Like, you know, me sitting here today, I wish I was never speaking about something like this. I never wanted this to be the story of my life. So I think hearing needs to be believing. We need to believe. And that's, I think, a fear of why people won't say it.
Right. I hear you. Well, thank you both for coming on this podcast and being vulnerable and tackling this topic, this conversation. Hope it helps many people. Thank you for all you do at Ray of Hope and for trudging through the hard days to make days a lot brighter for many people in the world. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And like I said in the beginning, the voice that you're giving us, and on behalf of myself and all those survivors that we know and that we don't know, thank you so much for giving us this voice and the platform to be able to be talking about this today.
Of course. Keep spreading the light.
Thank you for listening to this super important episode of the podcast. Again, hats off to Zeldy and to Bashi for having the courage to come speak. Not easy at all. Ray of Hope is doing incredible work. The support groups, they have an entire community that they have built for survivors of sexual abuse. It's breaking down the stigma, and it's really letting people know that they're not alone. People who have been through this, and there are many people who have unfortunately gone through this, and that is not where the story ends for them because of Ray of Hope. You can go to rayofhopeus.org to see more about them. A big thank you to the production team at Meaningful People, always, for making another successful episode happen. If you are here on YouTube, leave a comment below. I'm sure there are going to be many survivors that are watching this episode, and your comment of courage, of light, might go a long way. So please leave a comment. We hope to be back at you once again next week with another episode of the podcast. Please leave a rating, leave a review, 5 stars. Love reading your reviews. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.